How's it going, everyone? It's Geoff Chryslers, a detail enthusiast, here with your next installment of my BN1 restoration. So lots of little odds and ends done over the last few weeks, just getting her ready for turning the key and turning her over for the first time. So I've got the suspension alignment all finished here. I'll go through that today. And all of the fluids are filled: oil, coolant, brake fluid. Everything's greased and lubricated everywhere. The batteries are charged and fully installed here. Yeah, she's looking really good. Lots of little odds and ends I've done. I replaced the cork sealing ring with a proper cork sealing ring there. I had a neoprene one in there before, so now it's got the proper fitting, and of course that's working now. With the batteries hooked up, I've been kind of going through and testing all the electrical, so all of the dash lights work, and the heater works, and the wiper motor works, and the horns work, and the starter works. So everything's looking really good there. Yeah, and so this week I've been going through the process of bleeding the brakes with my friend Trevor helping. It's kind of a two-person job. One person has to work the pedal and the other person bleeds the bleeder screws on each wheel. And well, anybody who's ever done a BN1, these four-wheel drum brakes, the fronts especially, are proving to be quite a problem trying to get all the air worked out. Because you've got a double cylinder system here, a front and a rear cylinder, I think air is getting trapped in between them. And plus, where the bleeder screw is on the far one, you can barely see it there, but the bleeder screw's on the bottom, and it seems kind of counterintuitive. If it was on the top, it would be a lot easier to get the air out. So that creates another sticky spot that I think I'm gonna have to try some sort of a vacuum bleed system to try and get these air bubbles out, because I do not have a solid pedal yet. However, if I do pump the pedal, I can get it solid. So that tells me that I think that the master cylinder is at least sealing, which is a good sign. But we got more work to do before this car has brakes. So one thing I will say, since I have completely overhauled my brake system on this car, I've got all new lines and fully rebuilt master cylinder and reservoir and new brake cylinders. So it's all new stuff. Any residue of the old brake fluid is long gone. So I've decided to go with silicone brake fluid on my restoration. Silicone brake fluid has come a long way since yesteryear. There's actually a really great article on the Moss Motors website about brake fluids and talks a lot about silicone. And you know, it used to be an issue years ago where the silicone would destroy the rubber parts in our master cylinders and things like that. And that is no longer the case and hasn't been for quite some time. So the rubbers we're using now have come a long way, and so have the brake fluids themselves. Chemically have changed and evolved to be safer and better. So yeah, really happy to be using silicone, especially for the bleeding process. There's often, you know, splashes and spurts of brake fluid that are landing on paint, and if it was conventional brake fluid, you're going to lose your paint. So silicone is all safe and won't harm your paint at all. So and it doesn't attract moisture like other brake fluids can out of the air. So it just seems like the better option for a vintage car like this. So yeah, we've topped this off with some fresh purple silicone brake fluid, and can start doing the bleeding process. Start always with the furthest wheel away from the master cylinder, so that would be the back left. We'll start with bleeding that, and then switch to the back right, and then work our way forward to the closest wheel. Hey guys, I just want to explain, I just did the front alignment on my BN1 here, and of course that is adjusted by adjusting this center cross arm. You got a undo the ball joints, and then you can just wind them in. One's a right-handed screw and the other one's left-handed, and you can just screw them in or out as it needs to do, and that adjusts the toe-in angle. And what I did, you got to have the wheels on the car obviously because you're using the rim, and I just used a tape measure from the rim to the frame, which the frame members are parallel and straight with the car. So just at the front to the frame and measured that, and then at the back to the frame and measured that, and made sure that the fronts were 1/8 of an inch smaller than the back. 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch, it says. And that's all there is to it. So of course, once I got the alignment set with the wheels, suddenly I realized my steering wheel was no longer in alignment because I had just pushed it on before it was aligned. So I had to undo the olive again and relieve the wiring so that it could move. And on this end, once that olive is undone, you can just pull that center section out just far enough to get the wheel off, undo the nut and take the steering wheel off, realign it with the wheels, and then push it all back in and put it all back together. So now the wheels are aligned. So alignment is done, reassembled all the ball joints with fresh cotter pins, and we're looking good. Now another thing I did this week, I finished making the starter cable, just in the bare plastic sheathing with, I soldered on the terminal ends and then put some heat shrink, heavy heat shrink over the connection there. I believe the originals, it was like a molded rubber there, but heat shrink does a good job at capturing the look at least. And also I had ordered from British Wiring, this link was missing from my original harness, so I had to cut open the heat shrink on theirs and solder in this wire and then put on new heat shrink so that it's sharing that terminal, and then bring it over here and soldered on another terminal to this end with some similar heat shrink on the end to finish it off. So now that's added. So we've just got to set the timing and we can get into turning her over for the first time. She's full of fresh oil, she's full of coolant, she's full of brake fluid, she's got all her fluids in now. I also this week added the heater hoses, which those are hoses that I did the textured covering on to give them that rougher look, so they're not smooth and shiny. Another thing I did this past week was my original heater pipe here had a really nasty dent in the middle of it, and I was gonna live with it to maintain the original one, but that dent just stood out so much compared to the rest of this beautiful restoration. I couldn't live with it, so I took the heater pipe out, and I soldered the dent. I just filled it with a bunch of solder and then sanded it down smooth, and you wouldn't know it's there now. And it's you know, the solder's a good fix. It's not going to go anywhere. It's on a copper pipe, so it's going to be a good strong bond. And yeah, dent is virtually invisible now. And of course, to finish it off, like last week, the heater pipe, the fuel line going down out of here, and of course these little stay brackets were all hand painted silver on Healy hundreds. That was a factory practice that they did for all of those pieces. So we got the Valvoline VR1 racing oil, the high zinc content oil, came in this morning, so went and picked it up on the way into the shop this morning, and we're just filling her with oil. So I've started with the oil filter. You soak it first and then just fill up the whole thing full of oil. And in my previous episode, I showed how the exploded view of how this goes together, and there's like a sprung set up in the bottom where the filter drops on, and it's all sealed and held in place with a little pin along the shaft. So that's the Purelator oil filter that a lot of BN1s had. And of course here I'm just filling the oil one by one in the top. letting it drizzle down. I'm just pouring it evenly along the rocker shaft, a bit at a time as it flows in. You don't want to have it overflowing. Let that drain down a little bit. And add some more. So you can see I was adjusting the valves the other day, and I've got them all set so that the 12 thou feeler gauge just slides in there nicely. And with each one I was turning it over with using the starter solenoid and just keeping the feeler gauge in there and making sure that it's not too tight or too loose, and then just, you know, adjusting the screw up or down and then tightening the nut once it's set. So that's done, so they should be roughly where they need to be. Of course, once we get the engine started and warmed up, we'll have to go through that adjustment process again just to fine-tune them. And of course, I also went through the process. We got her up to top dead center, just pulled the number 1 plug out and stuck a little feeler in there so you could feel the top of the piston where it reaches its highest point. And of course, the 7/8 valves are just starting to rock. So once we know it's there at top dead center, I pulled the distributor out and just turned it so that the rotor is now pointed to fire number 1. And so it should be able to fire now when we start her up and at least get started, and then we can fine tune the adjustment there of the timing by turning the rotor to, or turning the distributor to where it needs to be. Another thing I did this weekend was hook up the clutch linkage. I had to just link it up to the side arm there and go forward to the front link, and so the clutch is now functioning properly. And went to go hook up the throttle linkage as well, and found that it wasn't tight enough around the throttle pivot there, and go to tighten it the other day and the bolt broke. So I've got to get a new bolt, and actually the pivot link seems to be slightly out of shape, so I'm gonna have to take it off and see what's going on with it. So another thing, I purchased a new battery charger. This one's a ProLogix, and you can just set your voltage, 12 volt or 6 volt, and then what type of battery. These are those new AGM, Lucas Reproduction AGM batteries that will never need servicing. And yeah, I'm just making sure both batteries are fully charged. I'm doing them individually, at least this time. I mean, once they're fully mounted in the car, I'll probably switch to 12 volts and try to do them in series. But I wanted to just make sure by doing them individually. So once this is complete, I've already done the other one and it's in the car now. So with fully charged batteries, we can start testing all the systems and preparing her for start day. Now, one thing I was testing it a week or so ago with these batteries that weren't fully charged, but it was enough to test some of the lighting and electrical. And I was able to determine that my old flasher unit here, which I spent so much time restoring the outside finish on it and trying to get that label recreated by hand, it was shot inside. It wasn't working. So I purchased a new screw-in terminal flasher, which, if you've seen them, they're just a plain can, and it's a shorter can, in fact, but it is the same diameter. So I was able to take apart this original by carefully prying open the bottom flange there and pulling out the internals and popping the new internals inside the original can, and then bending over the flange again. And of course I had to, the new terminal ends were a different size and thread to my original screws. So in order to keep those original little cheese head flat screws, I drilled and re-tapped those terminal ends to take the original screws. So lots of fun just to save that original flasher, but I'm glad I did. So, also today, I just got this new fresh air hose in the mail. This is one I ordered from a heating and cooling company down in Connecticut. I just saw it online. It was the right size, dimensions, and being 4-inch diameter, and just had the right look to it for these early BN1, the rubbery plastic type of hose. And I'm quite happy with that. It's a nice, the actual material is like smooth. It's the other ones I've seen from SC Parts that a lot of people use have like a woven texture to it, which I don't like. The originals never had that. So I'm quite impressed with this. I think I'm gonna use this one. It has a better look than any of the other ones I've seen available. So quite happy with that. So first step done for interior of any Austin Healey is to lay down a layer of tar paper just on the main floors. But this was a factory practice. They all had it, BN1 through BJ8. This layer of tar paper just on the main floors. And you just glue around the outside edges is fine. And then I'll be poking through the holes for my seat tracks next. And then I can mount the seats. So here you can see the BN1 passenger side seat rail arrangement. So you've got tar paper on the floor, and then a black metal washer that goes across there, and then your 3/4 inch spacer, and then inside this 3/4 inch spacer there's T-nuts in these 3 holes, and then these holes just go through under the floor. They line up with the holes in the floor. So these are 1.25 quarter 28 1.25 long bolts with washers and lock washers and nuts on the bottom. They go down through the floor. Bolt this in place, and then you've got a 5/16 riser here, which goes over top of that, and the big holes go over the bolt heads like this. And then your seat pan can now go on that, and you can use, it's installed with 4 bolts, and you can use either the front pair or the rear pair, so you get a little bit of adjustment there. So that's how the passenger side was done. And then actually on early BN1s that had the adjustable steering wheel, you would see this setup being used on both sides, including the driver. So, but once they switched to non-adjustable steering, that's when they added seat tracks, which is what my car has, just on the driver's side. So for the driver's side, it's similar arrangement. You've got tar paper on the floor, and then your black metal washer piece, and then instead of the 3/4 inch packer, you've just got the 5/16 packing piece in here. And then your seat tracks, your zinc plated sliding seat tracks that have the chrome handle, they are used on top, and they have studs in them already. So the studs go down through the floor, and you've got washers and these special little T-nuts to hold them in place. And on the top here, of course, it's again flat washers and lock washers and nuts. So here you can see I've bolted the passenger seat in. I decided to just kind of centralize it on the runners and used the outermost bolts for good secure hold. But you can use any 4 basically along the way and give yourself some adjustment there. So with both seats bolted in, I'll discuss the actual seats themselves. This is the style of Austin Healey seat that we saw on all the early Healeys. So all of the Austin Healey 100 BN1s and BN2s maintain this style, as well as the early 106 Longbridge built BN4s carried on this style of seat. And the difference is, when you're looking at it, so this outer perimeter piping on the early seats comes down around the outside here and wraps around and connects to itself along the bottom edge, whereas later cars, it came down here and then does a dive following these seams along the inside here. So that's one difference. Of course, the whole makeup of the seat is different in that These early backrests are a flat steel pan, whereas later cars had stiffening ribs in them. And these early ones had wooden tack strips riveted to the bottom edge that wrap around the back. So the upholstery is pulled over and it's all hand tacked along the bottom there, and then you've got a piece of hide-em strip here to cover the heads of the tacks. And of course these bottom arms are actually hand stitched in this area. So you'll notice the little segmented look that they all had. And the cushion makeup is also quite different on these, in that you've got these taller seat pans on the earlier cars, whereas later cars had a shorter angle iron frame. And of course the actual seat cushion is built on a plywood seat base that's riveted and screwed together. And then you got your Dunlopillow foam on top, and then the cover's put on and hand tacked around the bottom. So, and these the lower cushions on all Healey's just lifts out, sits nicely into those trays. And yeah, so you can see there's the brown painted frame, which again, all Longbridge cars seem to have these frames painted brown instead of black. And then the cushion itself, you got the Dunlopillow foam, and it's all hand tacked there. So that is what makes up the early style Austin Healey seats. And those just drop in place there. Slide them in, get them aligned at the back first, and then just set them down into the tray. So those are early Austin Healey seats. So yeah, I've got this freshened battery switch installed. My old switch was not working quite properly. It wasn't fully turning off. I had rebuilt it, but it was pretty rough inside, and I feel a lot better just having a new switch here. Of course, but with the new switch, I put on my original Shorty knob and changed over the hardware to a lot of my original hardware. So it's pretty indistinguishable from the original. Of course, this is the tag that was applied to these battery switches. And yeah, pretty neat little detail to add to finish it off. Of course, that'll all be buried in the trunk here, barely visible, and surrounded in an armor cord. So that's it for this week. Until next week, when we should hopefully have the brakes finished and sorted, and turn the key for the first time and get her running and tune her up. Until then, my name's Geoff Chrysler, a detail enthusiast. See you next time.